The day I met James, I knew he didn't want me. His eyes said it all. Our families had arranged everything without our consent. But what started as a prison sentence turned into something neither of us expected. This is our story of reluctance, revelation, and unexpected love. My name is Amara. I grew up in a family where tradition wasn't just important, it was everything. My parents had immigrated from Nigeria before I was born, but they brought their customs and expectations with them, intact and non-negotiable. I was the dutiful daughter, excelling in school, helping with my younger siblings, and never questioning the path that had been laid out for me. That path, as it turned out, included a husband of my parents' choosing. I'd always known arranged marriages were common in our community. My older cousins had gone through it, and their relationships seemed functional enough. Some even looked happy. I thought I had more time, though. I was only 24, finishing my master's degree in education. But that's when my father announced that they had found the perfect match through family connections at church. His name was James, the son of a respected family from Ghana. Educated, successful, from a good family. The perfect son-in-law on paper. I still remember the first time I saw James. It was at a formal meeting between our families. I wore my best dress, my mother had spent hours styling my hair, and I practiced my most polite smile. When James walked in, I noticed he was handsome, tall with broad shoulders and a serious face that rarely smiled. But what struck me most wasn't his appearance. It was the flash of disappointment in his eyes when he first looked at me. It was brief, quickly masked with politeness, but unmistakable. I knew immediately that whatever had been arranged, he wasn't happy about it. The pressure mounted in the weeks that followed. My parents reminded me daily of the honor this marriage would bring to our family, the practicality of joining two successful families, the security of being with someone from our culture. I tried voicing my concerns. Shouldn't we date first? Shouldn't there be some connection? But my questions were dismissed. Love grows, my mother would say. Respect comes first, then love follows. James's family was equally insistent. His father and mine had business connections, and this union would strengthen community ties. Our wedding day arrived with the inevitability of a scheduled appointment. The ceremony was elaborate, colourful, and joyless. James and I went through the motions, speaking our vows mechanically, hands touching, but hearts distant. In the wedding photos, we stood side by side, careful not to lean too close, smiles that never reached our eyes. The celebration around us was genuine. Our families were thrilled. But we were strangers, bound by tradition and expectations, rather than choice or affection. Moving in together was like a bizarre social experiment. We bought a small house in the suburbs, halfway between both our families. James took the master bedroom, I took the guest room. We established polite routines around bathroom schedules and kitchen use. We spoke about practical matters, bills, groceries, whose turn it was to take out the trash. But there was no warmth, no genuine conversation. We were roommates with rings, navigating the awkward reality of our situation. At night, I'd lie awake wondering if this emptiness was what my future held. I wondered if James felt the same hollowness, but I never asked. We were too busy maintaining the facade of a proper marriage for our families, too afraid to acknowledge the truth of our arrangement when we were alone. We were two people trapped in a tradition neither of us had the courage to challenge, living parallel lives under one roof, united only by the expectations of others. The first few months of our marriage felt like an elaborate performance. During family dinners or community events, James and I would play the part of newlyweds, standing close enough to appear united, but never touching unless absolutely necessary. His smile would appear on cue when his mother asked how we were settling in, and I'd nod along with rehearsed answers about decorating our new home. But the moment we closed our front door, the performance ended. The silence between us was deafening. James's routine was predictable. He left early for work, came home late, and spent weekends either at the gym or with his friends. When he was home, he'd retreat to his bedroom or sit silently watching sports in the living room. I tried at first, cooking traditional meals, asking about his day, suggesting we might get to know each other. His responses were always polite but distant. Dinner was fine. Work was busy. Maybe another time. The invisible wall between us grew thicker with each passing day. Then came the family gatherings at his parents' home. His mother would examine me with critical eyes, commenting on my cooking techniques, suggesting I wear my hair differently, speaking in their native language when she didn't want me to understand. His sisters would exchange glances when I spoke, sometimes laughing quietly. One Sunday afternoon, his aunt asked him in what she thought was a hushed voice, "Couldn't they find you someone lighter? Someone more suitable?" James said nothing, just stared at his plate. His silence hurt more than the comment itself. I threw myself into my own life, finishing my degree, starting my teaching career, building friendships outside our shared community. I decorated the house, making the space mine since it never felt like ours. I called my parents less frequently, tired of pretending everything was wonderful. When they visited, James would suddenly become attentive, touching my shoulder, laughing at appropriate moments. They believed we were just adjusting, that the connection they had arranged was blossoming as planned. I didn't have the heart to reveal the truth. Despite the emptiness between us, I kept trying. I left notes about my schedule, asked about his preferences for household items, suggested we at least establish a friendship. Sometimes, I thought I saw a crack in his armor, a genuine thank you for a favor, a moment of real conversation about a news story. But these moments were rare and quickly forgotten. I realized I was the only one trying to build a bridge across the chasm between us. The breaking point came 6 months into our marriage. James had friends over, while I was supposedly out with colleagues. I returned early, quietly entering through the side door. I heard his voice from the kitchen, clear and bitter. "Yeah, man, it's not what I wanted. Got stuck with her because of my dad's business deal. She's not my type, you know what I mean. Too traditional, too dark, too much." His friend laughed, and James continued, "Just making the best of it until I figure something out." I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding in my ears. The words stung, but they also clarified everything. This wasn't just awkwardness or adjustment. He fundamentally didn't want me, didn't see me as worthy. I slipped back out the door and walked around the neighborhood for hours, tears streaming down my face, finally confronting the reality of my situation. That night, after his friends left, I sat alone in my room and made a decision. I couldn't change James's feelings. I couldn't force him to see me, to want me. But I could choose how I responded to this rejection. I could wither under it, or I could build a life anyway, with or without his participation. If this was my marriage, then I would focus on the parts of my life I could control. I would create joy and purpose despite his indifference. I would live fully, even if I had to do it alone while sharing an address. Whatever future awaited us, I would face it standing tall, not diminished by his disappointment in who I am. Something strange happens when you stop expecting anything from someone. Sometimes they surprise you. I had committed to building my own happiness, focused on my teaching career, joined a book club, started taking weekend photography classes. I stopped trying to engage James in conversation unless necessary. I stopped hoping he'd join me for dinner. I stopped waiting for him to see me. And that's when things began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. It started with small moments. I came home late one rainy evening after a parent-teacher conference, soaked and exhausted. There was a plate of food in the microwave with a sticky note. "Thought you might be hungry. No signature needed." Another time, he fixed the leaky faucet in my bathroom without my asking. We began to exchange brief, genuine smiles when passing in the hallway. Nothing dramatic, just tiny cracks in the ice between us. Then came the night that changed everything. I woke up at 2 a.m. with excruciating abdominal pain, curled up on my bathroom floor, unable to stand. With no one else to call, I had to text James. He appeared in seconds, still half asleep but instantly alert when he saw me. Without hesitation, he scooped me up and drove me to the emergency room, stayed while they diagnosed a severe kidney infection, and brought me home when they discharged me the next day. For the week that followed, he checked my temperature, made sure I took my antibiotics, and even worked from home 2 days when the fever was at its worst. Neither of us mentioned it when I recovered, but something had shifted. Shortly after, during a holiday gathering at his parents' home, his mother began her usual subtle criticism. "Amara, you should really try straightening your hair sometimes. It would look more professional." Before I could respond with my practiced polite smile, James spoke up. "Mum, stop. Amara's hair is beautiful exactly how it is." The room fell silent. His mother looked shocked. I was frozen, unsure I'd heard correctly. On the drive home, I thanked him. He simply shrugged and said, "It's true." That night, for the first time, we sat together in the living room, watching a documentary side by side, not talking much, but not avoiding each other either. As months passed, our worlds began to overlap more often. He'd ask about my students. I'd inquire about his work projects. We discovered a shared love for Anthony Bourdain's travel shows and began watching them together on Sunday evenings. He started joining me on grocery trips, where I learned he had strong opinions about breakfast cereals and couldn't resist good cheese. I found out he could cook surprisingly well, but only a few specific dishes his grandmother had taught him. Small revelations that made the stranger slowly become a person to me. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, we'd started eating together a few nights a week. He paused, dishcloth in hand. "I need to tell you something," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I wasn't fair to you when we got married. I had expectations, prejudices. I thought I knew what kind of woman I wanted, and when our parents arranged this, I was angry because you didn't fit that image." He finally looked at me. "I was wrong. I didn't give you a chance." I stood there, dishes forgotten, hearing the words I'd stopped hoping for. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked quietly. "Because you deserve to know that the problem was never you," he said. "It was me, my narrow mind, my stupid assumptions." He hesitated. "And because I think we might actually have a chance at something real, if you're willing." I didn't answer right away. The hurt from those early months was still there, but so was this new reality we'd been slowly building. This unexpected connection forming despite our beginning. "I don't know what that looks like," I admitted. "Neither of us chose this." "Maybe that's the point," he said. "Maybe we need to start choosing each other now, every day, instead of just accepting what was handed to us." As I went to bed that night, his words echoed in my mind, choosing each other. It was the first time either of us had acknowledged that we had a choice, that this marriage could be more than an obligation we were fulfilling for our families. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I wasn't ready to forgive everything, wasn't sure I could forget the painful start to our story. But for the first time, I allowed myself to wonder if there might be a different ending than the one I'd resigned myself to. That conversation marked the beginning of something new between us. Not immediately romantic, but intentional. We started having breakfast together before work, talking about our plans for the day. James began texting me during lunch breaks, sharing funny stories about his coworkers or asking about my students. I found myself looking forward to these messages, to hearing his key in the door in the evenings. The first time he touched me deliberately, not for show, not by accident, was when he reached across the kitchen counter to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. "You had flour on your face," he said, but his hand lingered a moment longer than necessary. I felt a flutter in my chest that I hadn't expected, hadn't allowed myself to imagine possible. James's transformation was most evident around his family. At Sunday dinners, he now sat beside me instead of across the table, his arm occasionally brushing mine. When his cousin made a comment about my Nigerian accent being so strong, James immediately countered, "I love her accent. It's musical." His mother noticed the change too. She pulled me aside one afternoon while I was helping in the kitchen. "He looks at you differently now," she said, studying my face. "What have you done to my son?" There was no malice in her question, just genuine curiosity. "Nothing," I answered honestly. "We're just seeing each other for the first time." The real test came when James's parents invited an old family friend to dinner, a woman they had once considered as a potential match for him before our arrangement. She was everything I wasn't, light-skinned, straight-haired, from a wealthier family. The kind of woman who fit their image of the perfect daughter-in-law. Throughout the evening, his mother made pointed comments about her accomplishments, her family connections, her beauty. I sat quietly, old insecurities rising to the surface. After dinner, James's father pulled him aside. Though they spoke in hushed tones, I could hear fragments of their conversation. "It's not too late," his father said. "These arrangements can be undone. If you're not happy—" "I am happy," James interrupted, his voice firm. "Amara is my wife, the only wife I want." Later that night, as we drove home in silence, I finally asked the question that had been burning inside me. "Would you have chosen her? If you'd had the choice—" James was quiet for a long moment. "A year ago, maybe. Because I didn't know what I really needed." He reached for my hand across the console. "But now I would choose you. Every time." I didn't realize I was crying until he brushed a tear from my cheek. When we got home, for the first time, he followed me to my bedroom door. "Can we talk?" he asked. We sat on the edge of my bed, and he told me about his journey, how he'd been raised with certain expectations about the kind of woman he should marry, how meeting me had challenged everything he thought he wanted, how watching me build my life despite his rejection had made him admire me in ways he never expected. "I was so busy being angry about not having a choice that I didn't see the gift in front of me," he said. "You're the strongest person I know, Amara, and the most beautiful, inside and out." That night, James slept in my room, not for intimacy but for closeness. We lay facing each other, talking until dawn about our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. He told me about the pressure he'd always felt to be the perfect son, the worthy heir. I shared my struggles with self-image in a world that rarely celebrated women who looked like me. We talked about the cultures that had shaped us, finding unexpected similarities in our different traditions. In the weeks that followed, we began to build something intentional. We cleared out the spare room and made it a shared office space. We cooked meals together, blending recipes from both our backgrounds. We started a savings account for a trip to visit both Nigeria and Ghana someday. And slowly, cautiously, we began to share not just our living space, but our hearts. The woman who had once been a stranger, an obligation, became my confidant, my partner, my friend. The man who had once looked at me with disappointment now gazed at me with admiration and growing affection. Neither of us said the word love yet. We were both too careful, too aware of our unusual beginning. But I felt it growing between us, tender and unexpected, like a flower blooming in the most unlikely soil. 18 months into our marriage, a marriage neither of us had chosen, everything changed again. My father called one evening with news that left me speechless. The elder who had helped arrange our marriage had admitted to a conflict of interest. There had been financial incentives involved, agreements made that neither James nor I had known about. "It was not done properly," my father said, his voice heavy with shame. "According to tradition, this means you have grounds to dissolve the union if you wish." I sat with this information for days before sharing it with James. We had built something real from our forced beginning, something precious. But a question haunted me. Would we have chosen this path if we'd had a real choice from the start. When I finally told him, sitting on our back porch as the sun set, James was quiet for a long time. "So we're not really married?" he asked finally. "According to my father, we are. But traditional customs would recognize our right to separate without shame, if that's what we wanted." My heart pounded as I said the words. Both families would accept it. "Is that what you want?" His voice was carefully neutral, his eyes focused on the horizon. I studied his profile, the face that had become so dear to me over these months. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I never got to choose you. You never got to choose me. Maybe we should have that chance now." The next few weeks were strange. We continued our daily routines, but with a new awareness between us, the awareness of choice. We were careful with each other, almost formal at times. Our families, once so insistent on our union, now awkwardly offered their support for whatever decision we made. Friends who knew our story watched us with curious eyes, wondering if the relationship they'd seen blossom was about to end. Then one Sunday morning, I woke to find the house empty. James had left a note. "Meet me at Highland Park at noon. Wear something nice." Nothing more. Confused but intrigued, I dressed in a yellow sundress he had once complimented and headed to the park. I found him waiting by the lake, dressed in a crisp blue shirt, holding a small picnic basket. "What's all this?" I asked. "Our first date," he said simply. "The one we never got to have." We spent the afternoon together, eating, talking, laughing, as if meeting for the first time. As the sun began to set, he took my hand and led me to a quiet bench overlooking the water. "Amara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I've been thinking about what you said, about never getting to choose each other. You're right, we were robbed of that, so I'm fixing it now." He took a deep breath. "I'm choosing you. Not because our family said so, not because of tradition or obligation, because I love you, because you've become essential to me in ways I never imagined possible." His eyes held mine, vulnerable and certain all at once. "I want to stay married to you, not because we have to, but because I can't imagine my life without you now." Tears filled my eyes as the weight of his words settled over me. "What if I hadn't been forced on you?" I whispered. "What if you'd been free to find someone else?" "Then I would have missed the greatest gift of my life," he said simply. "Sometimes the wrong beginning leads to the right destination." In that moment, looking into his eyes, I made my choice too. I chose the man who had learned to see me, who had grown with me, who had discovered love where he least expected it. I chose the journey we had traveled together. Difficult, unexpected, but ultimately precious. "I choose you too," I said, my voice steady despite my tears. "Not because of the arrangement, not because it's expected, because I love who we've become together." He pulled me close, and as the sun set over the lake, we shared a kiss that felt like a beginning, the real beginning we had finally earned. We would still face challenges, our family's expectations, cultural differences, our own fears and insecurities, but we would face them as a team, as partners who had chosen each other with clear eyes and full hearts. What started as an arrangement had become a choice. What began as obligation had transformed into love. And the man who never wanted me became the one who couldn't imagine life without me. Sometimes I've learned love finds its way to us through the most unexpected doors, and sometimes the path we fight against leads us exactly where we're meant to be. We chose each other when we finally had the choice. Our story isn't perfect, but it's ours. If you're facing an impossible situation, remember that love can grow in the most unexpected places. Like, subscribe, and share your story in the comments. Sometimes the person you never wanted becomes the one you can't live without.